November of 2011 had settled over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, with the kind of cold that seeps through steel and concrete, the kind that makes every night shift feel longer than it is. And at 10:40 p.m., I was seated at my console when the radar screen showed something that had no business being there. 3 faint returns drifted into view, slow, steady, descending. But they behaved like nothing I'd seen in my 2 years working night operations. No transponder, no IFF, no flight plan filed, nothing responding to queries. They flickered like signals coming through a broken antenna, bright 1 second, barely visible the next, then vanishing entirely before pulsing back again. Captain Ryan McConnell stood behind the duty airman, silent but tense, leaning forward as if proximity alone could force the contacts to reveal themselves. I was Sergeant David Ellison, Assistant Operations Controller, and in all my time here, every aircraft within 50 miles, from civilian Cessnas to cargo haulers to military transports, followed procedures. These 3 were the exception. McConnell's voice finally broke the quiet, low but edged with concern, as he asked the airman how long the contacts had been present. And the airman replied they'd first appeared at 10:34 p.m., intermittently blinking in and out ever since. No comms. No identification. Nothing. McConnell straightened and turned toward me. "Get Foster up," he said. I dialed the duty officer's quarters, and after 3 rings, Lieutenant Jack Foster answered, groggy and annoyed. I kept it simple. Unidentified contacts moving toward the restricted forest east of the runway. No transponder, no radio. Foster said he'd be there in 5 minutes, and somehow made it in 3, stepping into the operations center still fastening his jacket, but his expression sharpened the second he saw the radar display. He watched the strange returns for half a minute before muttering, "Whatever those are, they're not birds. Too deliberate, too organized." McConnell didn't hesitate. "Get a helicopter airborne. I want visual confirmation." Foster grabbed the handset, contacted the flight line, and minutes later a UH-60 Blackhawk roared awake in the November cold. Sergeant Cole Tanner and Private Noah Briggs were assigned as spotters, equipped with thermal cameras and handheld radars, ready to sweep the tree canopy for whatever had slipped into our airspace. The chopper lifted off at 11:01 p.m., its icon sweeping across our radar as it moved east toward the forest, a sprawling tangle of oak and pine stretching miles into the dark, where no lights, no houses, no roads existed. Just wilderness. Tanner radioed in, "Operations Eagle 2 on station, beginning thermal scan." McConnell responded with the last known coordinates, grid November Echo 7, roughly 200 feet altitude. Tanner acknowledged, and we watched the helicopter circle the area, sweeping for heat signatures. The 3 unknown contacts no longer appeared on our radar. They had either landed or dropped low enough to vanish beneath coverage. Minutes passed with nothing but static and the muted hum of rotors in the background. Then Tanner reported negative thermal hits. Foster instructed them to lower altitude, to use their spotlight. The chopper descended, its beam cutting white paths through the trees, but still Tanner reported no movement, no heat, nothing. Finally, at 11:18 p.m., McConnell ordered them back. But even as he said it, I knew we wouldn't wait until morning. By 11:30 p.m., the call was made to send a ground team. Small element, light gear, no heavy weapons, just reconnaissance. Find whatever touchdown, recover it if possible, report back if not. In the briefing room, McConnell explained the plan while Foster laid a map across the table, outlining our entry point, the terrain, and the search zone. I was assigned a second in command, Ramirez, our young comms tech, would manage radio. Tanner and Briggs volunteered to join since they'd already been over the area. 5 of us total. Foster circled the coordinates. This is where we began. Standard formation, eyes open, no assumptions. Ramirez asked the question we all felt. "Sir, what exactly are we expecting out there?" Foster didn't answer right away. He glanced at McConnell, who remained silent, arms folded, jaw clenched. Finally, Foster replied, "Probably drones, maybe civilian ones that wandered into restricted airspace." It sounded reasonable, but none of us believed it. We geared up, M4s, NVGs, GPS units, basic survival kits, radios, Tanner took the thermal imager, Briggs packed extra batteries and a digital camera. At 12:15 a.m., we loaded into a Humvee and headed east toward the forest access road. Fog pulled low across the ground, illuminated by the headlights in ghostly streaks, and the deeper we drove, the quieter the world seemed to become. By the time we reached the chain-link gate and rolled into the clearing used by forestry crews, I felt a pressure in the air, subtle but wrong. We stepped out into cold silence, broken only by an owl calling once from somewhere deep in the tree line. I checked my watch, 12:22 a.m. Foster raised his NVGs and scanned the forest ahead. "Stay tight," he said, slow and quiet. And with that, we entered the woods to find whatever radar had captured, though I was already wondering if it had found us first. We moved into the tree line in a tight single-file column, the forest swallowing us the moment we stepped past the first row of trunks, and the moon, already weak behind the clouds, vanished entirely beneath the canopy. The ground was damp with fallen leaves, muffling every footstep into a soft, wet whisper that made our progress feel unreal, like we were gliding instead of walking. Foster led the way, halting every few yards to listen, raising a closed fist when he wanted us frozen. Each time we stopped, the silence deepened around us until even our breathing felt too loud for the darkness we were walking through. After 20 minutes, Ramirez confirmed we'd reached the coordinates, exactly where the radar signals had disappeared earlier. Foster signaled for us to halt and form a loose circle. Tanner powered on the thermal imager, sweeping slow arcs across the black trunks and tangled brush. Nothing. No animals, no people, no machines. Just us and the sound of our own lungs pushing cold air. Foster ordered a 20-meter spread search, so we branched out carefully, staying within sight of each other. I headed north, brushing my light softly over the ground, leaves, branches, a mat of earth untouched by anything unusual. Just forest. Too normal. Then Briggs hissed, "Over here." We closed on him, finding him crouched beside a massive oak. His light pointed at something I didn't notice at first. Then it clicked. The leaves around the tree had been arranged, too evenly, too perfectly, as if swept aside with deliberate care. Briggs brushed them away, revealing a patch of compacted earth, smooth, pressed. Something heavy had touched down there, recently enough to leave the ground flattened. Foster knelt, examining it without a word. Tanner scanned it with thermal. Nothing. No heat, no residual warmth, nothing alive. If something had landed, it left only silence behind. No branches broken overhead, no scratches, no scorch marks, no debris. Just soil that had been pressed and then abandoned. Foster raised his radio to report it, but all he got was static, a soft hiss that didn't fluctuate with tuning. Ramirez stepped forward, adjusting the handheld radio pack, but the interference didn't break. He swapped batteries. Still nothing. He tried a backup frequency. More static, but underneath it I heard a faint distortion, like a voice, but stretched and warped, until it sounded almost inhuman. Then even that vanished, swallowed by the same hissing void. "Sir," Ramirez said, swallowing hard, "it's not a battery issue." And that was when the fog rolled in. It came out of nowhere. One moment the air was clear, crisp, normal, and the next the forest was drowning in a dense gray shroud that swallowed light whole. I could barely see my hand in front of my rifle. The temperature dropped so sharply it felt like someone opened a freezer door in the middle of the woods. Tanner swept the thermal again. "Interference," he whispered. The whole screen's white noise. Foster's voice cut through the mist, tight but in control. "Close formation. Nobody breaks off. We're pulling back to the vehicle." But as we moved, something felt wrong. The ground didn't slope the way it should have. We should have been heading downhill toward the clearing, but instead the terrain stretched flat for far too long. The trees repeating in impossible patterns as if the forest were folding back on itself. Ramirez checked the GPS, still functional, but the coordinates didn't match what our eyes were telling us. Briggs tapped his compass. The needle spun lazily, like it had lost interest in pointing north. "Sir," Ramirez whispered, his voice trebling, "I don't think we're lost. I think something doesn't want us to leave." No one argued. Because we all felt it. Pressure in the air, weight on the lungs, a strange tension that made the skin crawl on the back of my neck, as if unseen fingers hovered just above the surface. Then Briggs pointed east. "What is that?" A soft glow pulsed through the fog. Blue light, faint but unmistakable, maybe 50 yards off. It hung in midair, still as a lantern suspended from an invisible thread. We froze. The glow pulsed once, then again, in a slow, 6-second rhythm. A moment later, a second light appeared beside it, then a third. 3 lights. 3 contacts, same count as the radar returns. Foster raised his rifle. "Tanner," he murmured. "Thermal check." Tanner aimed the imager, stared, then lowered it slowly. "Sir, it's not registering anything. Not heat, not cold, not even mass. It's like it's not actually there." But it was. We could see it, hear the faint hum inside the air, feel the cold tightening in our chests. Foster reached for the radio despite knowing it wouldn't work. "We're moving west, slowly." We backpedaled, rifles trained on the lights. They didn't pursue, they didn't flicker, they just remained there, pulsing, steady, deliberate, intelligent. And then, as we retreated, the fog began to thin. Visibility grew from 10 feet to 15, then 30. Familiar shapes appeared, a fallen log, a crooked cluster of young pines, a moss-covered sump we'd passed earlier. We were re-entering terrain that made sense. And at the exact moment the forest returned to normal, all 3 lights shut off at once. Darkness swallowed the clearing. We stood frozen, listening to nothing but our own breath. The forest had gone dead silent. No wind, no insects, no animals, like the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. "Keep moving," Foster finally whispered. "Don't stop." It took us 15 more minutes to reach the clearing. The Humvee sat there exactly as we'd left it, damp with condensation, headlights dimly reflecting off the fog. It looked like a lifeboat floating in dark water. Foster checked his watch. 1:47 a.m. We'd only been in the woods for an hour, but every minute of it felt elongated, stretched thin. We climbed in, slammed the doors shut, and Foster started the engine. The radio crackled violently, and then cleared. Captain McConnell's voice burst through the speakers. "Urgent, tight. Ground Team Alpha, report your status immediately." Foster snatched the handset before the second call came through. His voice steady even though I could see the tension running along his jaw as he answered. "Operations? This is Alpha? We're mobile and heading back now. Found evidence of a landing site. No visual contact with unknown objects. Comms compromised inside the forest. Full report on arrival." The line went silent long enough that I thought we'd lost the signal again, before McConnell finally replied, tight and strained. "Copy that. Return immediately. Command wants you in for debriefing the moment you arrive." Foster didn't bother responding. He set the radio down, stared ahead through the windshield, and kept driving. None of us spoke. The Humvee's engine hummed beneath us, but the silence inside the vehicle felt heavier than the fog lingering outside. All of us were thinking about the same thing. Those lights, the forest twisting around us, the compasses spinning, the radios going dead. None of it matched any training, any equipment malfunction, any natural phenomenon we'd ever been briefed on. When we reached the gate, the guard on duty waved us through without hesitation, his face drawn tight like someone who'd been told to expect bad news. Foster parked outside the operations building, shut off the engine, and turned to us with an expression that left no room for debate. "Whatever we saw," he said quietly, "stays between us until we're officially cleared to speak. No rumors, no speculation, just the facts." We nodded because that was the only answer we could give. But deep down, every one of us knew facts weren't going to be enough, not for what we'd walked into. Inside the debriefing room, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale sheen on the long table at the center. Captain McConnell was already there, along with 2 men I'd never seen before. One wore dress blues with no name tag, the kind of uniform reserved for people whose files didn't show up on regular databases. The other wore a plain suit, older, gray hair, eyes that scanned us like he was cataloging the details, weighing each of us before she even sat down. McConnell gestured to the chairs, and we took our seats. The civilian remained standing near the wall, arms crossed behind his back. The unnamed officer opened a folder and slid a document across the table toward Foster. "This is the radar log from your patrol," he said, voice flat, professional, unreadable. 3 contacts, intermittent returns, no transponder signatures, then nothing. They vanished at 0042 hours. Foster scanned the paper and nodded. Matches what we saw. We reached the coordinates around 0025. By then the contacts were gone. The officer leaned back. Tell us what you found. Foster delivered our account with clinical precision. No embellishment, no emotion, just a sequence of events. The disturbed earth, the absence of thermal traces, the fog that rolled in faster than weather should allow, the complete radio blackout, the compass interference, and finally the strange lights pulsing in the mist. He described everything with the same tone he'd used to brief a routine patrol, but the room felt tighter with each word. When Foster finished, the civilian stepped forward. It was the first time he spoke, and his voice carried a weight that made the air shift. These lights, he said, describe them. Color, intensity, pattern. I answered because I'd been staring at them longest, transfixed, trapped, unable to look away. Blue-white, I said quietly. Soft, not glaring, pulsed every 6 seconds. 3 lights, evenly spaced. They didn't move, they just watched. The man's expression twitched almost imperceptibly. Any sound? No, I said, but the air felt pressurized. He studied us a moment longer, then stepped back into silence. The officer closed his folder. What you encountered tonight, he said slowly, falls under an ongoing classified investigation. You are not to discuss it with anyone outside this room, not with other units, not family, not friends. This is protected under operational security. Do you understand? We answered in unison. Yes. McConnell stood. You're off duty for 12 hours. Report back at 1800. There may be a follow-up tasking. The implication sat cold in my stomach. A follow-up meant going back into those woods, to the lights, the fog, the presence we all felt but couldn't explain. We filed out into the hallway, the base eerily quiet. Ramirez walked beside me, pale, his voice barely above a whisper. They knew, he said. Before we even got back, they already knew what we were going to say. I didn't respond, but he was right. That civilian's questions weren't random. They were targeted, practiced. He had heard this story before. Back in my quarters by 3 a.m., I lay awake replaying each moment. Every detail felt wrong. The lights didn't move like aircraft. The fog didn't behave like weather. The compass didn't spin like equipment failure. And the way the forest seemed to twist around us, no training manual covered that. By 4:30, sleep was a lost cause. I walked to the mess hall, where Tanner sat alone, staring at his hands like they might start shaking if he looked away. I poured 2 coffees and sat across from him. He looked up slowly. You feel it too? He asked. Feel what? Like it didn't end tonight. Like something still. He stopped, searching for the word. Watching. I didn't disagree. The truth sat between us like another presence. After sunrise, the base returned to its routine rhythms, but none of us felt normal. Every shadow seemed too still, every silence too heavy. By 1800, we gathered in the operations room again. McConnell stood with the same civilian from before. This time, he introduced himself. Mr. Garrett, he said simply. No rank, no agency, nothing. Garrett laid a detailed map across the table, marked with red circles across the eastern forest. Since your patrol, he said, tapping the markers, radar has detected additional anomalies. Same signature, same behavior. They appear, remain stationary for several minutes, then vanish. One of the circles near the northern boundary pulsed red on the digital map. This location, Garrett said, voice tightening, has been active for the past 2 hours. Whatever you saw last night, it hasn't left. The room went still, and just like that, we knew the forest wasn't done with us. The things we'd seen, whatever they were, had returned, and they were waiting. We rolled into that briefing with the weight of the previous night still pressing on all of us. And when Garrett tapped that northern circle on the map, its pulsing red boundary marking an anomaly that hadn't disappeared like the others, the air in the room seemed to tighten around our lungs. Because whatever we'd stumbled into wasn't just repeating, it was escalating. Garrett said the signatures matched exactly. Same intermittent radar presence, same stationary behavior, same abrupt vanishing, except this time the object hadn't vanished at all. It had linked a presence that carried for all the single meaning from this field. Foster leaned over the map, brow creased, voice steady but darker than before, when he asked if we were expected to hit every anomaly on the board. But Garrett shook his head and pointed again to that single location. "Only this one," he said. "It's the only one that hasn't moved." That phrasing, "hasn't moved," felt like a warning more than a detail. Reconnell stepped forward, outlining the new plan. 3 teams entering the forest from 3 directions: Alpha from the north, Bravo from the south, Charlie from the west, converging simultaneously on the target zone. More bodies, more equipment, more coverage, no engagement unless threatened. Record everything, maintain discipline. Garrett then introduced the updated gear: reinforced communication systems, encrypted frequencies, signal boosters, and jamming-resistant hardware. When he said, "If the radios fail again, we'll know the interference is deliberate," the room fell into an even deeper silence. Because although he didn't say the word intelligent, every one of us heard it beneath the sentence. We geared up fast: night vision cameras, spectrum analyzers, auxiliary battery packs, secondary recorders, redundancies stacked on redundancies. By the time we stepped back outside, the sky had collapsed into full darkness, a deep indigo smear, broken only by a line of orange fading over the horizon. 3 Humvees rolled out together, forming a loose convoy that rumbled toward the access roads with solemn purpose. Foster parked us farther north this time. The forest here felt older, thicker, as if centuries of untouched growth had created a wall meant to keep intruders away. We dismounted and entered on foot, maintaining radio checks with Bravo and Charlie as we pushed deeper. For the first 10 minutes, everything felt deceptively normal. Crunch of leaves, steady breaths, faint hiss of radio chatter. But then Bravo's voice crackled in. "Alpha, Bravo entering southern sector. No visual." Foster acknowledged, and we continued climbing through dense underbrush, each step weighted with the memory of the previous night's fog. At 8:18 p.m. we reached the clearing marked on the map, a 30-foot opening surrounded by tall pines, branches interwoven so tightly that only pale streaks of moonlight slipped through. Nothing seemed disturbed on the ground. No compressed soil, no debris, no marks. Foster signaled for perimeter formation, and we took up positions, Tanner sweeping the tree line with thermal. "Nothing," he muttered. Ramirez called over the radio, "Bravo, Charlie, Alpha on target. Status." Bravo responded immediately, reporting they were 200 meters south and closing. Charlie confirmed they would reach the clearing in 3 minutes. Foster ordered us to hold until both teams converged. The forest grew still around us. No breeze, no birds, no shifting branches, just a quiet that felt too intentional, like everything around us was listening. Then Briggs whispered, "Sir, look up." We all tilted our heads, and there it was. A faint glow barely visible through the canopy, hovering overhead, a soft, pulsing light, the same color and rhythm we'd seen in the fog. It hung about 50 feet above the clearing, motionless. Foster immediately radioed, "All teams, Alpha has visual on airborne object. Confirm." Bravo answered, "They couldn't see anything through the trees." Charlie came in next. "Copy. Faint glow, holding position." The light pulsed again, brighter, sharper, like it was adjusting to our presence. Then a second light appeared beside it, and then a third, forming the same perfect triangular pattern as before. Tanner lifted the thermal imager, and I watched the color drain from his face. "Sir," he said quietly, "nothing. It's not giving off heat. It's not absorbing it either. It's not registering on the electromagnetic sensors. It's like it's not real, but it was there, visible, tangible, casting a muted, ghostly shimmer through the branches." Foster raised his camera, recording steady shots, and ordered Ramirez to verify transmission back to base. Ramirez checked his readings, signal at full strength, nothing interfering, at least not yet. Then the lights began descending. Slowly, gracefully, drifting down through thick pines without disturbing a single branch, maintaining perfect formation as they rotated in a silent, deliberate spiral. When they cleared the canopy, the clearing filled with a cold blue radiance that cast no shadows, like light without a source. Frost formed instantly on the pine needles, traveling in delicate patterns outward from the descending lights, shimmering like ice crystals under a winter moon. My breath fogged thick in the air, turning each inhale into a visible cloud. Foster's voice came through steady but strained. "Do not fire. Hold position." The lights hovered 10 feet above the ground, pulsing in rhythm so precise it felt mathematical. Then the blue shifted, bleached itself into a sharp, painful white that made my eyes water. When the glare dimmed, the shapes were different. No longer spheres, they had flattened into discs, smooth-edged with dark centers that looked almost like eyes. Briggs stepped back, whispering, "What are those things?" No one answered. Before we could react, every piece of equipment we carried erupted with violent static. Radios screeched, cameras buzzed into distortion, thermal imagers whined and died. GPS screens flickered like broken strobes. The clearing filled with the shriek of overwhelmed circuits, drowning out even our breathing. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the lights flared once, blinding white, and shot straight upward with impossible acceleration, vanishing through the canopy in a blink. Leaving only a fading streak burned into my vision, and a wave of dead silence behind them. The frost melted instantly, dripping from branches like the forest itself was exhaling. None of us moved, none of us spoke. We simply stood there, surrounded by equipment that had failed all at once, staring at the empty air where those objects had hovered just seconds earlier. And in that silence, I knew we weren't dealing with something that stumbled into our airspace. Whatever those lights were, they wanted to be seen, and they wanted us to know exactly how powerless our technology was against them. For several long seconds after the lights vanished, none of us could force our bodies to move. The clearing felt hollowed out, drained, like whatever had descended had pulled the warmth and sound out of the air along with it, leaving only a thin sheen of melting frost dripping off pine needles like cold sweat. Finally, Foster lowered his useless camera, his hands trembling, despite the training that had hardened him through years of night ops and combat flights. He keyed the radio, even though it had just been screaming static. "Bravo, Charlie, did you see the departure?" Bravo responded first, voice unsteady, confirming they'd glimpsed the lights shooting upward at impossible speed. Charlie echoed the same report, adding that the objects left no sound, no vapor trail, nothing that behaved like propulsion. Foster turned to Ramirez, who was checking the recorder's display with growing disbelief. "Sir, everything's corrupted. The entire last 5 minutes gone, just static." Briggs checked his digital camera next, cursing softly as the screen flashed red and powered itself off. Tanner attempted to reboot the thermal imager, but it remained dead, as if the circuitry had been wiped clean. Every device that had captured those lights had been erased. Like whatever those things were, they hadn't just interfered with our equipment, they had reached into it, removed themselves, and left nothing behind. Foster excelled sharply in radioactive landing and watched Mark's Town Hill flew from the center to the sun. Foster excelled sharply and waited for a Biden's tank impact. The same thing Foster excelled sharply. He had to place of death or the only time he was disturbed. Alpha to base. Direct contact made with unidentified aerial objects. Objects departed at extreme velocity. All recording equipment compromised. Request immediate extraction. McConnell's response was instant, crisp, and urgent. Copy, Alpha. All teams fall back. Extraction authorized. That was all we needed. We regrouped with Bravo and Charlie at the access road. 15 men wearing the same stunned expression. Eyes wide, shoulders tense, trying to process something that refused to fit inside human logic. The ride back to base was quiet except for the engine hum. Ramirez leaned toward me once we were halfway there and whispered, "They didn't want us to have proof. They took it, like they knew exactly what to erase." I didn't say anything, because he wasn't wrong. What we witnessed wasn't blind interference, it was selective, precise, intentional. When we arrived, Garrett was waiting outside the operations building with the same unreadable expression he'd worn the night before, as if he expected everything before we even said a word. He led us into a smaller room this time, deep inside the building, with no windows and no cameras. The kind of room built for conversations that never make it into official reports. Once we were seated, Garrett spoke calmly, almost clinically, as if discussing weather patterns instead of an encounter that shattered every category the military used to classify threats. "What you witnessed," he began, "has occurred 17 times in the last 6 months, not just here, across multiple installations. 17, 6 months." I felt the room tilt slightly, the number hitting harder than the cold wind outside. This wasn't an isolated event. This was a pattern, ongoing, organized, systematic. Foster leaned forward, his voice steady but edged with disbelief. "If this has happened 17 times, how do you still not know what they are?" Garrett didn't flinch. "Because they leave nothing behind. No heat signatures, no material scraps, no radiation. They erase recordings, shut down electronics, evade every capture method we've attempted. Every incident ends the same way, only trained personnel reporting identical visual contact." Tanner shook his head, frustration tightening his voice. "You're saying they're intelligent?" Garrett hesitated. "I'm saying their behavior strongly suggests coordination and purpose. Whether that intelligence is human, technological, or something else, we can't confirm." Ramirez leaned back, whispering under his breath, "Something else?" Garrett continued, sliding a tablet across the table. On it was a map of the U.S., marked with red points. Bases with nuclear assets, advanced radar arrays, strategic weapons, communications hubs, Wright-Patterson, Nellis, Malmstrom, Vandenberg. Installations that form the backbone of national security. "These are the only locations where they've appeared," Garrett said quietly. "Every site houses highly sensitive technology. Whatever these objects are, they're observing, mapping, studying capabilities we consider classified." I stared at the map, a cold realization settling into my bones. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. It was reconnaissance. Foster asked the only question that mattered. "What do you need from us?" Garrett folded his hands. "A dedicated observation unit, rapid response, immediate deployment when anomalies appear. You'll receive equipment designed to resist interference, multiple redundancies, hardened data capture, analog backups. Your expertise and your first-hand experience make you ideal for this assignment." Then he added the part that made the room fall into complete silence. "This operation is voluntary, but once accepted, it is permanent. No transfers, no reassignments, no outside disclosure. You'll be involved until this phenomenon is understood, or until the activity stops." Foster looked at us, reading each face, weighing our fear against duty. Then he turned back to Garrett. "We're in." And in that moment, whether we knew it or not, our lives stepped out of the boundaries of normal military service and into something else, something watching us from above the tree line, something that erased itself from our machines, but not from our memories, something that wasn't done with us yet. Garrett dismissed us with that calm authority that made it clear we were no longer operating under standard protocol, and stepping out into the cold November air afterward felt different, as if the base itself had shifted under our feet, as if the routine lights of the runway and distant hangars were nothing but a thin layer covering something far deeper. Over the next 3 weeks, that feeling only grew stronger as our lives transformed into a tightly controlled cycle of training, testing, and night operations, under the guidance of Garrett's specialized team. We were issued new equipment, devices we'd never seen before, some still wrapped in prototype labels, others so hardened they looked like relics from another era. Electromagnetic field detectors calibrated to resist overload. Multi-spectrum cameras with triple-layer battery backups. Analog logging tools designed to preserve data even if digital systems failed. Garrett's analysts drilled us relentlessly, teaching us how to document encounters in parallel systems, how to cross-verify data, how to preserve physical notes when electronics died. And they did die. Twice during training, the lights reappeared, once hovering near the southern perimeter, once drifting along the runway, both times maintaining that same slow pulse, that same impossible stillness. We responded immediately, deploying the new equipment, and as expected, the primary systems failed, wiped clean as before. But the backups worked. The analog logs captured fragments. A few still images survived, a blur of white against black sky, a strange triangular glint, faint, distorted. Not enough to show the world, but enough to prove to ourselves that what we'd seen wasn't a shared delusion. Then, on December 14th, everything changed. The radar picked up a single contact at 3:12 a.m. Not three, not a formation, but one lone return, holding position above the forest for nearly 20 minutes, longer than any previous sighting. It wasn't drifting. It wasn't vanishing intermittently. It was waiting. Foster assembled the team before the alarm finished sounding. We were out the door within minutes, racing into the freezing night with every piece of gear we had. Snow dusted the ground, crunching under our boots as we reached the forest and followed the GPS coordinates to the same clearing where we'd seen the triangle weeks earlier. But this time, something was different. The object wasn't hovering above the trees. It was on the ground. A glowing orb about the size of a compact car sat in the clearing, not pulsating but radiating a steady, almost blinding white light that bathed the entire area in unnatural brightness. The trees looked like charcoal sketches under the glow, stripped of color and depth. The air, instead of freezing, grew warmer as we approached, the temperature rising until sweat formed beneath my collar despite the winter night. Foster raised a fist, stopping us 30 feet away. The object sat perfectly still, its surface patterned with shifting symbols, geometric lines, circles, shapes that seemed to rearrange themselves like a living circuit board. Light traveled along these patterns, flowing in organized pulses. Tanner raised the electromagnetic detector, and the instrument shrieked so violently that he had to shut it off. "Sir," he whispered, "it's putting out more energy than anything I've ever measured. It should be melting the ground." But the dirt beneath the object remained untouched. No scorch marks, no impressions, as if the object wasn't resting on the earth so much as occupying space above it. Ramirez swallowed. Should we try communicating? It was reckless, but Foster considered it seriously. Then he stepped forward, 10 feet from the object, raising his hand in a calm, universal gesture of peace. The object reacted instantly. The light dimmed slightly. The shifting patterns slowed, settling into a fixed arrangement, as if acknowledging him. Foster's voice was level but cautious. "We are United States Air Force personnel," he said. "This is restricted military territory. Identify yourself." The object pulsed once, and a sound rolled through the clearing, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through my chest more than my ears. It lasted brief seconds, then faded. Foster tried again. "If you understand, respond." The object pulsed again, this time with a higher, almost musical tone. "What?" Briggs lifted his camera, and for the first time, the device kept recording. It didn't shut down. The object wasn't erasing anything. Instead, it began rising, slowly, weightlessly, lifting off the ground without any visible propulsion. When it reached 20 feet, the patterns on its surface rearranged themselves into symbols, clear, stable, intentional. They glowed brighter, holding in place long enough for me to yank Ramirez's notepad and sketch them as fast as my hand could move. Circles intersecting lines, angled shapes forming sequences, almost mathematical. The display lasted 10 seconds, long enough to burn into memory. Then the symbols faded, the object dimmed, and in a blink it shot upward, leaving only an afterimage seared into my vision and a silent clearing behind. The temperature plunged instantly back to winter cold. None of us spoke. Foster finally turned to me. "Did you get it?" I raised the notepad, my sketches scribbled across the page. "All of it," I said. Back at base, Garrett's expression shifted the moment he saw the symbols. For the first time, he looked rattled. Within minutes, he called in a cryptographer from the intelligence division. She examined the sketches, scowling as she ran them against databases. After an hour, she admitted, "This isn't any known human language. But it is structured, it has repetition, it has rules, it's a code." Garrett didn't blink. "Can you break it?" She shook her head. "Not from one sample." And so began the next stage of our mission, documenting symbols, collecting patterns, building a database. Over the next 2 months, the objects returned 6 more times, each encounter different, each display more complex. I filled 3 notebooks with symbols. The cryptographer filled servers with correlations. Slowly, a picture emerged. The symbols weren't random. They weren't a message in the traditional sense. They were coordinates, locations, times, events. A map, a survey of us. Garrett briefed his superiors, and the response was immediate. Our unit expanded, funding surged, more bases were added. But then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the activity stopped. February 23rd, no more radar contacts. No more lights, no more symbols. It was as if whatever had been visiting had collected everything it needed and moved on. When the contacts ceased after February 23rd, the quiet that followed felt almost unnatural, as if the sky itself were holding its breath after months of watching us watch it. Our expanded observation unit remained on high alert, equipment staged, vehicles fueled, personnel briefed at all hours, but nothing returned. No faint radar signatures, no hovering lights, no symbols. Weeks slipped into months, winter giving way to spring, then to the thick heat of early summer, and still the radar screens stayed clean. The forest remained dark, and the nights felt heavier for the absence of what we had come to expect. Eventually, rotations resumed. Assignments shifted. I stayed for another year, partly out of duty, partly because leaving felt irresponsible, like walking away from a locked door that could fly open at any moment. Foster remained even longer, eventually assuming command of the entire program when Garrett retired. Ramirez and Tanner transferred to other units, but all of us stayed in touch. We didn't need to talk openly about it. A shared silence lived between us. A pact formed in the cold breath of those Ohio woods. Even now, years later, when I look back at Wright-Patterson, it appears unchanged. The same runway stretching into the horizon, the same hangars standing like silent sentinels, the same thick timber rising beyond the eastern perimeter. Visitors see only a standard military installation. But I know the truth layered beneath those ordinary structures. A truth kept alive in classified reports, encrypted files, and the fading lines of my notebooks, filled with symbols no one has fully deciphered. Sometimes I flip through those pages, tracing the shapes with my fingertip, wondering if I'll ever understand what they meant, wondering if we weren't studying them as much as they were studying us. Because whatever those objects were, they had purpose, deliberate, organized purpose. They moved with precision. They erased themselves selectively. They communicated in patterns and sequences. And when they were finished gathering whatever they came for, they simply left, not defeated, not deterred, satisfied. That's what unsettles me most. Because when something that advanced finishes a survey, it means it has what it needs for whatever comes next. I still visit the base occasionally, and sometimes at night I'll stand by the fence line and stare toward the tree line. If you walk deep into that forest, you won't find landing impressions or frost patterns or pulsing lights, just leaves, branches, and the wind threading through them. But on rare nights, if the air is still enough, if the world grows quiet enough, you might feel it. A low vibration in the ground, a soft pressure behind your ribs. A hum you don't hear so much as sense. It fades quickly, like a held breath released, but it's enough to remind me the silence isn't permanent. Tanner still keeps a journal. When I ran into him years later at a veterans gathering in Columbus, he told me he still writes down anything strange he sees. Lights moving wrong, electronics flickering without cause, shadows that linger too long before fading. You start noticing patterns, he said. After that, you can't unsee them. He didn't say it with fear, more like resignation, as though he'd accepted that once you've glimpsed the impossible, the world never looks ordinary again. Last year, Foster sent me a message. Only 4 words, they came back different. He provided no details, no explanations, nothing else, just that message, and the silence that followed said more than any briefing could. If he'd been allowed to tell me more, he would have. The fact that he reached out at all meant something significant had happened, something that echoed what we'd witnessed in those woods. Maybe it happened at another base. Maybe it happened right there at Wright-Patterson. Maybe it happened somewhere we aren't cleared to know about. The civilian world isn't built to hold experiences like these. You can't explain to your family that you've stood in front of something that erased itself from multiple recording systems simultaneously, or that you've watched symbols appear on a glowing object that radiated heat without burning the ground beneath it. You can't tell coworkers that something in the sky reacted to your presence like it recognized you. So you learn to carry the silence. You learn to recognize others who carry it too, the way their eyes scan the horizon a little differently, the way they pause when electronics glitch for no reason, the way they look up when a distant light hangs too still in the night sky. That forest near Wright-Patterson still holds something in its quiet. Not evidence, not debris, just memory. A memory of cold air turning warm under an impossible glow, of symbols rearranging themselves, like language on the verge of translation, of radios dying all at once, while the clearing filled with soundless light. And for those of us who stood beneath that impossible brightness, that memory lives in the back of our minds like a beacon pulsing every few months, reminding us that whatever visited us didn't disappear, it simply paused. Because sometimes, on crisp winter nights, when the stars hang sharp above the tree line, I step outside and scan the sky the same way I did years ago during the patrol. The lights never return, not yet, but that old familiar pressure sometimes creeps back into the air, subtle and unmistakable, like an unseen presence brushing past. And in those moments, I know they're still watching, still waiting. Whatever they came here to find, they haven't found it yet. And when they return, whether to Wright-Patterson or somewhere else, the world won't be ready. But some of us will be watching right back. When you peel back the quiet layers of Wright-Patterson, you find more than old cases and cold concrete. You find the echoes of things that were never meant to be seen, things that watched us long before we ever noticed them. And if there's one truth that stayed with me through all these years, it's this: some encounters don't end, they just wait. If you want more stories pulled from the shadows, more classified nights, more encounters that shouldn't be possible, then hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next report is already on its way. This is Captain Rubble, signing off. Stay alert, stay ready, and keep your eyes on the sky.